In a rare emotional moment, Hollywood icon Leonardo DiCaprio was brought to tears on stage after receiving a heartfelt honor from Burkina Faso's young president, Ibrahim Traoré. What began as a formal event quickly turned into a deeply moving exchange that stunned the audience and sent shock waves across social media. This powerful encounter between one of Hollywood's biggest stars and one of Africa's most courageous leaders left people around the world inspired and emotional. The hall was packed with reporters, dignitaries, and Hollywood figures. Bright lights shone on the stage, yet an unusual silence filled the room. Everyone expected the night to be glamorous, glittering speeches, polite applause, and predictable handshakes. But what no one knew was that something unforgettable was about to happen. Leonardo DiCaprio, the Hollywood icon known for his calm confidence, stood waiting backstage. He had accepted countless honors in his life, but tonight felt strangely different. He couldn't explain it, yet a weight pressed on his chest. His hands trembled ever so slightly. On the other side of the stage, Burkina Faso's young president, Ibrahim Traoré, adjusted his suit. At just 36 years old, he had already become a symbol of courage and leadership for millions across Africa. His eyes were steady, his presence magnetic. The announcer's voice boomed. "Please welcome President Ibrahim Traoré." Applause erupted, but Leonardo felt his heart race. For reasons he couldn't yet understand, he sensed that this wasn't just another award night. Something about Traoré's presence carried the weight of truth, of struggle, of hope. And soon that weight would bring tears to Leonardo's eyes. President Traoré stepped to the podium. He didn't rush. He didn't read from papers. Instead, he looked directly into the crowd, then at Leonardo, as though speaking to him alone. "Tonight is not about titles," Traoré began, his voice calm but powerful. "It is about courage. Courage to fight for our planet, for justice, and for those who cannot fight for themselves." The audience leaned forward. This wasn't the usual scripted praise. Traoré's words carried an unusual weight. Born from his own struggles, leading a small nation against enormous odds. He turned his gaze back to Leonardo. "Mr. DiCaprio, the world knows you as a great actor. But for us in Burkina Faso, we see something more. We see a man who has used his voice to defend the earth, to defend the voiceless. For that, you are not just an actor. You are a brother." The room went utterly silent. Leonardo blinked rapidly, trying to hide the moisture gathering in his eyes. No one had ever honored him like this, not with scripted flattery, but with raw, genuine gratitude. The moment already felt different. The air was heavy-charged. Then Traoré did something unexpected. From his inner pocket, he pulled out a small folded letter. His hands held it with care, almost reverence. "This," he said softly, "is not from me. It is from a child in Burkina Faso who insisted her words must reach you." He opened the letter and began to read aloud. The girl's words were simple, written in shaky handwriting, but they carried the force of truth. "Dear Leonardo DiCaprio, thank you for speaking for the forests, the rivers, and the animals. When people destroy our land, we suffer. But when you speak, the world listens. You give me hope that maybe one day children like me will live without fear of hunger or war." By the time Traoré finished, Leonardo's eyes were glistening. The audience was frozen, some already wiping their own tears. No one had expected the night to take this turn. The Hollywood icon was shaking his head slowly, overwhelmed, fighting to keep his composure. The cameras zoomed in. Millions would later watch this exact moment, their hearts breaking open. But for now, Leonardo simply whispered, "My God," as tears slipped down his cheeks. For a long moment after the letter was read, no one moved. The silence was so heavy that every breath could be heard. Then slowly, someone began to clap. Within seconds, the entire hall erupted in applause. Not the polite kind that follow speeches, but a thunderous standing ovation. People weren't just clapping for Leonardo. They were clapping for the bond that had suddenly formed between him and a child thousands of miles away. Leonardo pressed his hand against his chest, unable to speak. His lips trembled, and his eyes darted toward Traoré as if searching for strength. The president didn't smile. He simply nodded, his expression steady, reminding Leonardo that this was bigger than either of them. In the audience, even seasoned politicians and hardened celebrities were seen wiping their eyes. Cameras flashed, yet the moment felt strangely private, as though the entire hall was breathing as one. Leonardo tried to compose himself, but emotion overcame him. He bowed his head, whispering words only Trey could hear. For the first time in his career, Leonardo wasn't acting. He was simply a man undone by truth. Traoré stepped forward, placing a firm yet gentle hand on Leonardo's shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it carried immense power. The audience grew silent once again, sensing something rare was unfolding. "Do not be ashamed of your tears," Traoré said softly, his voice carrying across the hall. "Tears are the language of the soul. When words cannot carry the weight, the statement pierced everyone in the room. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't political. It was human." Leonardo finally lifted his head. His face was flushed, his eyes red, but there was no embarrassment. Instead, there was honesty, the kind of honesty rarely seen in Hollywood, where perfection is rehearsed and flaws are hidden. "I thought I came here to receive an award," Leonardo murmured, his voice breaking. "But what I received is something far greater, a reminder of why we fight." The cameras caught every trembling word, and the footage was already being shared live across the world. On social media, hashtags began to explode, carrying the moment to millions within minutes. The night had shifted. It was no longer about ceremony. It was about a connection that defied borders. Just when people thought the emotional peak had been reached, Traoré surprised them again. He reached for a small framed photograph brought on stage by an aide. "This," he said, holding it up, "is a school in my country that was rebuilt because of donations from people like you, Mr. DiCaprio. Children who once studied under broken roofs now sit in classrooms with light, with books, with hope." Gasps filled the room. The photo showed a simple classroom, bare walls, wooden benches, children with wide smiles. Yet in its simplicity, it carried more weight than any luxury stage set ever could. Leonardo covered his mouth with his hand. His entire body shook as he stared at the photo. Memories of his own childhood flashed before him, the dreams he once had, the obstacles he overcame. "This is why we honor you tonight," Traoré continued, "because you remind us that one voice, one action can light a fire in the darkness." By now, not only Leonardo, but dozens in the audience were openly crying. Even the cameras struggled to capture it all without shaking. The world was witnessing something unforgettable. An actor stripped of fame, a president stripped of politics, two men standing in raw truth. A single tear slid down Leonardo's cheek, catching the stage light like glass. He didn't bother to wipe it away. For years he had fought for the environment, spoken at summits, and faced critics who mocked him. Yet here, in front of this young African leader, his fight finally felt seen. The audience wasn't quiet anymore. Sniffles echoed through the hall. A woman in the front row covered her face with both hands, overwhelmed. Even seasoned reporters lowered their cameras, forgetting their jobs for a moment. Traoré stood tall, silent, letting Leonardo have his moment. He didn't rush him, didn't step in. He understood that sometimes silence speaks louder than speeches. Finally, Leonardo looked up and whispered, "This is the greatest honor of my life." His voice cracked, but the sincerity pierced through everyone listening. Around the world, live stream viewers typed frantically into comment sections. I'm crying watching this. What a powerful moment. Tro and DiCaprio. Unbelievable. It wasn't just an award anymore. It was history. The camera zoomed in as Leonardo finally steadied himself. His hands trembled as he reached for the microphone. I thought I understood the weight of my work, he said slowly, pausing between words. But tonight I see it through the eyes of a child, through the courage of a leader who risks everything for his people. And I realize I've barely begun. The audience gasped. This wasn't the kind of line delivered for applause. It was raw confession, and it struck like lightning. Trey then turned to the audience. The earth does not belong to America or Africa or any nation, he declared firmly. It belongs to our children. And if men like Leonardo will stand beside us, then perhaps those children still have a future. The hall shook with thunderous applause. Social media went wild. Clips of the moment spread across platforms within minutes. People who had never cared about Burkina Faso or even Leonardo's activism were suddenly tuned in, wiping their eyes. Two men from different worlds had created a single voice echoing far beyond the walls of that hall. As the applause died down, Leonardo leaned closer to Tro. The microphone didn't catch his words, but a nearby camera did. His voice was faint, almost breaking. My father once told me that true respect isn't won on screen. It's given when you stand for something real, Leonardo whispered. Tonight you reminded me of that. Thank you. Traoré looked at him, eyes steady, and gave the smallest nod. For a brief second, they were not president and celebrity. They were two men who understood the crushing weight of responsibility and the price of hope. Backstage, organizers exchanged nervous glances. The schedule had fallen apart. The event was no longer about awards or speeches. It had transformed into something unpredictable, raw, and unforgettable. On Twitter, hashtags soared to the top trends. Your tears of truth. Traoré and Leo. Hope for humanity. Some called it the most important moment of Leonardo's career. Others said it was the night Ibrahim Traoré became a global voice for dignity and courage. But inside the hall, none of that mattered. What mattered was the truth in Leonardo's tears and the silent strength in Traoré's eyes. Within minutes, the entire internet was on fire. News outlets interrupted broadcasts to stream the clip of Leonardo crying as Tro stood beside him. Journalists struggled to find the right words. Headlines ranged from Hollywood meets humanity to tears that shook the world. In Los Angeles, fans who had grown used to Leonardo's red carpet smiles suddenly saw him differently. They saw a man stripped of glamour. A man reminded of why he fought for something bigger than himself. In Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, crowds gathered around small television sets in cafes and homes. When they saw their president's calm dignity beside one of the world's most famous stars, cheers rang out. People clapped, some cried, and many whispered, "Our leader has spoken for us all." Traoré had not come seeking applause. Yet, by honoring another man, he had lifted his entire nation's voice. And for Leonardo, the night had shifted from a ceremony into a life-defining moment. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but he knew his heart would never be the same. Backstage, Leonardo's phone buzzed nonstop. Messages poured in from friends, activists, and even world leaders. Some simply wrote, "Thank you for showing us your heart." Others begged him to use this moment to push harder for climate justice. At the same time, Traoré's aides were overwhelmed by requests. Governments, NAS, and media outlets from every continent wanted interviews with him. They wanted to know more about the president who made Leonardo DiCaprio cry. But neither man seemed interested in the noise. While the world spun into frenzy, they sat together in a quiet lounge for a few minutes. No cameras, no microphones, just two men breathing after an emotional storm. Leonardo finally said, "You reminded me tonight that leadership isn't about power. It's about truth." Trey replied softly, "And truth only matters when it touches hearts. Tonight, the world listened because you showed yours." That private exchange would never be broadcast, but it sealed a bond between them. A bond that could not be scripted, bought, or faked. Later that evening, the two men walked back on stage together. The hall was still packed, buzzing with energy. The audience expected a closing speech, but instead, Leonardo held the microphone again. "I cannot let this night end without making a promise," he said, voice steady. "Now, President Traoré has reminded me that words alone are not enough. So, I pledge tonight to stand with him, to support projects that protect not only the earth, but the children who depend on it." The hall erupted. People jumped to their feet, applauding wildly. Some chanted Leonardo's name. Others shouted Traoré's. Traoré raised his hand for quiet, then added, "This is not about one man or one nation. It is about us all. If a Hollywood star and a young African president can stand together, then what excuse do the rest of us have to stay silent?" The applause thundered again. For many watching live, this wasn't just a touching event. It felt like the start of something historic. And deep down, both Leonardo and Traoré sensed it. The world would remember this night forever. By dawn the next morning, the video had crossed 200 million views online. People from every continent shared it with captions like, "This gave me hope again," and "I cried with him." A teacher in India paused her class to show her students the clip. A farmer in Brazil played it on a cracked phone and nodded silently. Even in war-torn regions, children huddled around tiny screens, watching Leonardo's tears and Traoré's calm strength. In Burkina Faso, the little girl who wrote the letter sat on a wooden stool as neighbors gathered around her home. When she realized her words had traveled to the world and had made Leonardo DiCaprio cry, her eyes filled with tears of her own. For once, the news wasn't about conflict, scandal, or tragedy. It was about dignity, truth, and the surprising humanity shared between a Hollywood star and a young African president. It felt as if for a single night, the world remembered what it meant to feel. While the media stormed with headlines, Leonardo sat quietly in his hotel room, exhausted but still shaken. His phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a politician or activist. It was his mother. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Leo, I watched you last night. I haven't seen you cry like that since you were a boy." Leonardo closed his eyes, leaning against the wall. His mother's words pierced through all the noise. For years, he had been celebrated for roles, awards, money. But this moment, this connection had touched even her. "You made me proud, son," she whispered. "Not as an actor, but as a man." Tears burned his eyes again. He whispered back, "Mom, I think I finally understand why I do all this." And somewhere across the city, Ibrahim Traoré was meeting with his team, reminding them that the honor given to Leonardo wasn't a performance. It was a message to the world. Two hearts, two paths now intertwined. Of course, not everyone was quick to praise. Some critics in the media initially tried to dismiss the night as just another celebrity moment. But as the full story spread, the letter from the child, the rebuilt school, the raw humanity in Traoré's words, those critics grew quieter. Clips of the girls' school circulated, showing classrooms filled with laughter and learning. Reporters who visited Burkina Faso returned with stories that no one could dismiss. Children proudly writing in new notebooks. Teachers smiling with gratitude. Communities changed. The usual cynicism collapsed under the weight of real, undeniable truth. Meanwhile, Leonardo appeared again in front of cameras, not as a polished actor, but as a man still visibly moved. Sometimes, he said, voice steady, "The world reminds you that awards don't matter. People do." For once, the critics didn't have a reply, and the bond between him and Traoré was no longer just a headline. It had become a symbol. On the third day after the event, as the world was still replaying the viral clip, a small envelope arrived at Leonardo's hotel. The handwriting on the front was shaky and familiar. It was from the same little girl in Burkina Faso, whose first letter had been read aloud by Traoré. Leonardo opened it with trembling hands. Inside, the girl had written, "When I saw you cry, I realized even the strongest people have hearts. Please don't stop fighting for the earth, because if you stop, we children will lose hope. Thank you for crying for us." Leonardo pressed the paper to his chest. His assistant found him sitting alone, tears falling silently onto the letter. That moment became private proof that the night was no accident. It was destiny. The bond between a child, a president, and a Hollywood star had woven into something bigger than all three of them, and Leonardo knew he couldn't turn back. By the week's end, governments, schools, and communities across the globe had joined the conversation. In Burkina Faso, children marched with small hand-painted signs that read, "Thank you, Leonardo." In New York, activists held vigils, candles glowing under the city lights. Leonardo and Traoré held a quiet press meeting together. No glamour, no red carpet, just 2 chairs and microphones. Reporters expected speeches, but what they saw was different. Leonardo simply said, "This young leader reminded me that tears aren't weakness. They're proof we still care. And if we can care, we can change." Traoré added, "The world is divided by many lines, but tonight those lines disappeared. A child's words, an actor's tears, a president's voice. Together, they became one truth." People watching from their living rooms cried openly. Even seasoned journalists admitted later that they had wiped their eyes behind cameras. The world had paused, not for tragedy, but for hope. On the final night of the week, Leonardo and Traoré stood side by side once more. This time outdoors under the stars. The crowd that gathered wasn't just filled with celebrities or politicians. It was ordinary people, families, students, workers. As the two men embraced, the cheers were deafening. Leonardo lifted the child's letter above his head, showing it to the crowd. His voice shook as he said, "This is the reason we fight. Not for fame, not for power, but for the future written in a child's hand." Traoré then placed his hand over Leonardo's, and together they raised the letter high. Cameras flashed, but what mattered was the emotion in the air. Pure, unfiltered humanity. People wept in the audience online. Millions watched live, typing words like, "I can't stop crying. And this gave me hope again." And with that, the event ended, not as a ceremony, but as a story that would live in hearts forever. Dear viewers, if this story touched you, don't just scroll away. Please like this video to spread the hope. Subscribe so you never miss stories that move hearts. And comment below what you felt while watching. Your words matter more than you know. Let's fill the world with love, one story at a time.